The Iron Warriors are brutal strategists, known for their siege-breaking tactics and expert craftsmanship of defensive positions. This made the Iron Warriors the perfect rival for their loyalist counterparts, the Imperial Fists. This bitter rivalry has led to some intense war games and eventually culminating in the Siege of Terra at the end of the Horus Heresy. Characterized by their unpainted armor and the use of hazard stripes, these guys take their health and safety responsibilities very seriously. This is going to be another really quick Horus Heresy tutorial to help you get these armies painted ready for the new edition. And because painting big numbers of Space Marines can get a little bit tedious, I want to try and make all these tutorials as quick and efficient as possible. Now, you don't need an airbrush for this tutorial, most of it is going to be done using a dry brush. Now, after priming this model in black and white, which to be honest wasn't completely necessary, I'm going to base it all in brown. Now, the reason the zenithal highlight isn't that necessary on this project is because the colours we're using are going to be pretty opaque. And you don't need an airbrush for this stage. If you can find a nice brown that you like in a rattle can, go ahead and use that instead. But because I already had the airbrush out, I'm going to go ahead and use charred brown for this first coat. And the reason we're using brown is because this is going to give us a really nice dirty metal effect later on. Once that brown's completely dry, we're going to come in with a dry brush and gunmetal. And the idea for the dry brushing is to give us not a complete 100% coverage like you would with a airbrush or a regular wet brush. This is where that brown undercoat is really going to shine. And we're just going to go back and forth quite lightly over all of the model to try and get as much of it covered in the silver as possible. And this paint is a joy to dry brush. It's almost like buffing the metal itself. And the second colour we're going to use is Dura Aluminium, which is a brighter version of that gunmetal. This time, don't put as much on your brush and be a little bit more selective about where you put it, concentrating on the higher points and the curved areas. And as you can see, that's one nice looking metal effect, and all in all took about 15 minutes to complete. That's including the drying time. If you'd pre-primed all of these, you could probably get through about 10 of them in about half an hour. For the heavy bolt gun, I'm going to use Citadel Black Templar contrast paint. And this was a bit of an experiment to see how efficient these contrast paints are when painting black areas. And also I was hoping with the transparency of these paints that I'll get a little bit of the metallic effect coming through. And it worked a treat on the bolt gun, but for the shoulders I am going to use just a normal black. And for this situation I would either use Citadel or Vallejo model colour blacks. The main difference between these two paints is the bottle that they come in. And I'm going to block out one of the shoulder pads in black and the other I'm going to leave blank for now, as that's going to be yellow and black. And when it comes to painting the yellow stripes, it's much easier to start with a yellow base, as trying to paint yellow over black is going to involve a lot of layers, as yellow is generally quite transparent. For all the areas that are going to have the hazard stripes, I'm going to base them all in a yellow. And when painting yellow over other colours, it's good to start on the more red end of the yellow spectrum, and that includes browns and oranges. And this is Jacquero orange, and this is sort of a browny, dirty orange. And you probably will need a few coats of this because, as I said, yellow is very transparent. But you don't have to be spot on because it's going to be mostly obscured by the black lines going over the top. And I'm going to highlight these areas just to brighten them up a bit with flat yellow from Vallejo. And again, 2 thin coats is good with this paint, but just make sure you leave the edges as the dark orange. And for the hazard stripes themselves, we're going to use some masking tape magic. Now just stick the tape down on your work surface, not too hard, and then grab yourself a metal ruler and a sharp blade. And it's just a case of measuring out the size that you want and cutting them nice and straight. I think I measured mine out to be about 3mm. And then just divide them up into manageable chunks. And then you should be able to peel them off nice and easily, sometimes nice and easily. And as you probably guessed, we're going to mask off the areas that we don't want to be black. It is quite easy to get these wonky even though they look straight before you've painted them, but they're not too hard to fix if you're not happy with the result. The most important thing is just to make sure you're pressing firmly enough to make sure no paint's going to get underneath the tape. And with your black paint, just go ahead and start filling in those yellow areas. These ones required a little bit of cleanup, but I just got the black paint out again and just fixed up some of the thickness of the lines. As you can see, I misjudged some of the back, so I'm just going to thicken them up a bit too. At this point, I might as well have just hand painted all of the stripes, but at least I've got some straight lines on the bits that worked. And I'm not particularly good at painting straight lines by myself. I decided to do a few minor highlights on this model, just with that Dura Aluminium again. And I also painted a couple of Legion markings and attempt at the logo on the shoulder. Now I really failed on the focusing here, but what I basically did was draw the shape of a skull using bright silver and then filled in the eyes and the teeth with black. And I am seriously considering investing in some transfer paper and seeing how that works. I'll make a video on it if it turns out alright. Then I made a few little chips using little dots of dura-aluminium around the ammo barrel and the other parts of the heavy bolter. And one last detail before we base this model, I'm just going to put the Legion marker in the center of the chest, mainly because I couldn't face painting another skull. And I almost forgot about his eyes, and to do this we just do a small dot of white in the center of the socket and then a little wash with Blood Angel's red contrast paint. The Iron Warrior's home planet is Olympia, and it's a bit of a barren industrial death world, so I want it to look really dried out and barren. And then stick a couple of rocks on there for interest, followed by a light dry brush with Celestial Grey once it's dried. And hair dryers are really handy when you're basing these minis because this stuff takes a long time to dry. And to tie it all in, I'm just going to give it a hit of this rubble pigment. And using an old dry brush, I'm just going to roughly place this around the base and the feet of the model just to give it a bit of a tie-in. And I don't really feel the need to set this pigment, it seems to do a good enough job on its own, just for a slight bit of discoloration. And there you have it, your first Iron Warrior in no time at all. Hopefully you can use these techniques on all of your dreadnoughts, tanks and all sorts of wonderful toys that the Iron Warriors like to play with. I'm really looking forward to seeing some of these Horus Heresy armies on the battlefield and all their splendour. And I might have to buy 2 of these Horus Heresy boxes just to get 2 big sized armies. So if you feel like hitting up my Patreon, I'm going to be broke pretty soon. Thank you for watching this tutorial. If you enjoyed it, stick around because there's more Horus Heresy content to come.